The marketplace on Zephyr Station buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of worlds conducted their daily business. Towering Krillian merchants with their crystalline exoskeletons haggled with floating ethereal traders, while small vixenite children darted between the stalls chasing holographic butterflies. The air hummed with a dozen different languages and the sweet scent of exotic spices from the Outer Rim territories. Marcus Chen walked through the crowded bazaar with his 8-year-old son Tommy, their matching brown hair catching the artificial sunlight that streamed through the station's transparent dome. They were among the few humans on this remote trading post, having arrived just 3 days ago aboard a cargo freighter. Marcus had taken a job as a maintenance engineer on the station, hoping to provide a better life for his son after losing his wife in the Terran mining incident 2 years prior. Tommy's eyes sparkled with wonder as he pointed at a vendor selling what looked like living jewelry that crawled up and down the seller's arms in mesmerizing patterns. The Zelthari merchant noticed the boy's fascination and extended one of his 4 arms, allowing a small golden creature to crawl toward Tommy. The boy giggled with delight as the harmless symbiote tickled his palm with its tiny legs. "Dad, can we get one, please?" Tommy asked, tugging at his father's sleeve with the innocent enthusiasm that only children possessed. His voice carried that particular pitch that parents worldwide recognized as the prelude to persistent begging. Marcus smiled and ruffled his son's hair. "Maybe next week, kiddo. Let me get my first paycheck and we'll see what we can afford." The truth was, Marcus had exactly 47 credits to his name, barely enough for food for the next few days, but he couldn't bear to disappoint his son completely. As they continued through the marketplace, Tommy ran ahead to examine a stall selling what appeared to be bottled lightning. The elderly Morphean vendor, her skin shifting from purple to blue in response to the boy's approach, seemed delighted by his curiosity and began explaining how the energy was harvested from storm worlds in the Vega system. Marcus was examining the price tags on some basic supplies when he heard his son's excited voice calling out, "Dad, look at this. The lightning changes colors when you touch the bottle." But Tommy's enthusiasm led him to step backward without looking, and he accidentally bumped into something large and metallic. The boy turned around to apologize just as his mother had taught him, but the words died in his throat. Standing before him was a galactic trooper, one of the elite peacekeeping forces that maintained order across the known galaxy. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, encased in powered armor that gleamed with a mirror-like finish. Its species was Drakmarian, a race known for their military prowess and strict adherence to hierarchical order. Through the helmet's visor, Tommy could see reptilian features with glowing amber eyes that seemed to burn with contempt. "Watch where you're going, you primitive little worm," the trooper growled in heavily accented galactic standard, his voice amplified by the suit's speakers. The translation immediately appeared in floating text above his head for those who didn't understand the language. Tommy's lower lip trembled as he looked up at the towering figure. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to bump into you. I was just looking at the pretty lightning in silence," the trooper barked, causing several nearby vendors to look up nervously. "Your species hasn't earned the right to address me directly, child. Humans are barely above the primitive classifications. You should be grateful we allow you to exist in civilized space at all." The marketplace around them began to quiet as more beings noticed the confrontation. Marcus, who had been examining a display of hydroponic equipment, heard the trooper's raised voice and started making his way through the crowd toward his son. Tommy's eyes filled with tears, but he stood his ground with the stubborn courage that seemed to run in his family. "My daddy says all people are equal, no matter what planet they're from or what they look like." The trooper's helmet amplified what might have been a laugh, but it came out as a harsh mechanical sound. "Your daddy is clearly as ignorant as you are, boy. Some species are born to rule, others to serve. Humans fall firmly in the latter category." Without warning, the trooper's armored boot shot forward, catching Tommy in the chest and sending the small boy tumbling backward across the smooth floor. Tommy cried out as he hit the ground hard, his shirt tearing as he slid several feet before coming to rest against a vendor's stall. The entire marketplace fell silent, except for Tommy's soft whimpering as he struggled to sit up, small scrapes visible on his palms where he had tried to break his fall. The Morphean vendor who had been showing him the bottled lightning rushed to help him, her skin now flashing angry shades of red. The trooper stood over the fallen child, his posture radiating satisfaction. Perhaps that will teach you to show proper respect to your betters, human whelp. Marcus had seen the entire incident unfold as he pushed through the crowd. His face had gone completely pale, then flushed red with an emotion that anyone who looked closely would recognize as barely controlled fury. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he watched his son struggle to get back on his feet. The marketplace remained frozen in tableau, dozens of alien eyes watching to see what the human father would do. Some species present had heard stories about human unpredictability, but most considered them to be exaggerations. After all, humans were a young species, barely a century into interstellar travel, with no significant military victories to their name. Marcus walked slowly toward his son, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He knelt beside Tommy, checking for serious injuries while whispering soft words of comfort. His hands were steady as he helped the boy stand, but those closest to him could see something dangerous flickering behind his eyes. The trooper watched with apparent amusement, clearly expecting the human to offer apologies and scurry away like the primitive creature he believed him to be. After all, what could one unarmed human possibly do against a fully equipped galactic trooper? Marcus stood slowly, keeping one hand on his son's shoulder. When he looked up at the trooper, his expression was calm, almost peaceful. But there was something in that calmness that made several of the more perceptive aliens in the crowd take an unconscious step backward. "Tommy," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a deadly calm that seemed to resonate through the silent marketplace. "Go stand with the nice lady over there." He nodded toward the Morphean vendor, who immediately extended her arms welcomingly toward the boy. Tommy looked up at his father with wide eyes that still glistened with tears. Even at 8 years old, he could sense that something fundamental had changed in the air around them. His father's face wore an expression he had never seen before, something cold and calculating that made him both proud and frightened at the same time. "But Dad," Tommy started. "Now, son." The words were gentle but carried an authority that brooked no argument. Tommy limped slowly toward the vendor, who wrapped him in her protective embrace while keeping her shifting skin focused on the unfolding confrontation. Marcus turned his full attention to the galactic trooper, who stood with arms crossed, clearly enjoying what he perceived as the human's helpless position. The trooper's armor gleamed under the marketplace lights, each piece representing technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. His weapon systems alone could level a city block, and his training had been honed through decades of combat across the galaxy. "Your offspring has been taught a valuable lesson about respecting authority," the trooper declared loudly, ensuring his words carried to every corner of the marketplace. "Perhaps you would benefit from similar instruction, human." Marcus took a step closer, his movements fluid and controlled. To most observers, he appeared completely relaxed, but those with military experience among the crowd recognized the subtle shift in his posture, the way his weight distributed across his feet, the slight angle of his shoulders. These were the movements of someone who had seen combat. "You hurt my son," Marcus said simply, his voice carrying no anger, no threats, just a statement of fact that somehow managed to sound more dangerous than any shouted challenge could have been. The trooper's helmet tilted slightly, as if he were studying an interesting specimen. "I corrected an undisciplined child of an inferior species. If you have complaints about galactic authority methods, you may file them through proper channels. I'm sure they'll receive all the attention they deserve." The mechanical laugh that followed was clearly intended to humiliate Marcus in front of the gathered crowd. Several species present were known to respect only strength, and the trooper was making it clear that he viewed humans as powerless to challenge galactic authority. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the trooper's words carefully. "You know, where I come from, there's an old saying, you can judge a civilization by how it treats its children." He paused, letting the words settle. "All children, not just the ones that look like you. Human philosophy is of no interest to me," the trooper replied dismissively. "Your species hasn't contributed anything of value to galactic civilization. You're barely more advanced than the primitive tribes we've encountered on dozens of backwater worlds." "You're right about one thing," Marcus agreed, taking another step closer. "We are a young species. We've only been part of your galactic community for about a century. But you know what we've been doing for the other few thousand years of our recorded history?" The trooper remained silent, but his posture suggested he was growing bored with the conversation. "We've been fighting," Marcus continued conversationally. "Fighting each other. fighting our environment, fighting for survival on a world that tried to kill us in 1,000 different ways. We've had more wars, conflicts, and battles than most species experience in their entire evolutionary history. A few of the alien spectators began to murmur among themselves. Some had heard rumors about human military capabilities, but official reports always described them as a minor species with limited combat experience. Your point being? The trooper asked with obvious irritation. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. My point is that while you were born into a civilization with advanced technology and peaceful expansion, humans had to earn every single day of survival. We didn't get handed powerful armor and energy weapons. We had to make do with whatever we could find, build, or steal. The trooper's hand moved casually toward his weapon, a gesture that in any other circumstance would have ended the conversation immediately. Are you threatening a Galactic Authority officer, human? Threatening? Marcus seemed genuinely surprised by the question. Oh no, I would never threaten someone. That would be against station regulations, wouldn't it? I'm just sharing some information about my species that might interest you. The crowd was growing larger as word of the confrontation spread through the marketplace. Beings from dozens of different worlds had gathered to watch what many assumed would be the swift subjugation of the uppity human. Some had even started recording the event, expecting to capture the moment when the trooper put the primitive in his place. You see, Marcus continued, his voice remaining conversational despite the tension crackling in the air. Humans have a particular talent that we've developed over thousands of years of constant warfare. We're very, very good at finding weaknesses in things that seem invulnerable. He gestured toward the trooper's impressive armor. Take that suit, for example. Drakmarian military technology, if I'm not mistaken, powered by a fusion cell located just behind the primary chest plate. Energy shielding powered by secondary cells in the shoulder assemblies. Combat effectiveness multiplied by neural interface connections that run through the helmet's base. The trooper's posture shifted slightly, becoming more defensive. The human shouldn't have been able to identify those details so accurately. Standard information available in any technical database. True, Marcus agreed. But what's not in those databases is how human engineers spend their time when they're not officially working. You see, we have this habit of taking apart everything we can get our hands on, just to understand how it works. It's a survival trait we developed when we couldn't afford to have our equipment fail at a critical moment. Several of the alien spectators were beginning to look uncomfortable. Some were starting to remember stories they had dismissed as exaggerations, tales of human unpredictability, and their disturbing tendency to find solutions that no one else would consider. Marcus pointed casually at a specific spot on the trooper's left shoulder. For instance, that armor has an automatic diagnostic system that runs a safety check every 37 seconds. During that check, there's a 0.3-second window where the neural interface partially disconnects to prevent feedback loops. Most beings would never notice such a brief interruption. The trooper's helmet turned sharply to examine the spot Marcus had indicated. How could you possibly know that? Because 3 days ago, when we arrived on this station, I spent 6 hours in the engineering bay helping to recalibrate the docking systems. The chief engineer is a Vorthan who loves to talk about technology, and he happened to mention that they'd recently serviced some Galactic Authority equipment. Marcus's smile grew wider, but colder. Humans are excellent listeners, especially when someone is discussing the technical specifications of military hardware. The trooper's weapon was now openly in his hand, though he hadn't yet powered it up. The threat was clear to everyone watching, but Marcus seemed completely unperturbed by the display of superior firepower. If anything, his relaxed demeanor seemed to become even more pronounced. Now you're thinking about using that plasma rifle, Marcus observed with the same tone he might use to comment on the weather. Standard Drakmarian military issue, capable of punching through reinforced starship hull plating. Quite impressive, really. The gathered crowd began to edge backward, sensing that the situation was about to escalate beyond mere words. Several parents pulled their children closer, while merchants started quietly securing their more valuable wares. But here's what I find fascinating about advanced weapons technology, Marcus continued, beginning to walk in a slow circle around the trooper. The more sophisticated a system becomes, the more potential failure points it develops. That rifle, for example, requires a quantum coherence field to maintain plasma stability. Disrupt that field at the right frequency, and instead of a devastating weapon, "You have a very expensive hand warmer." The trooper's helmet tracked Marcus's movement. But there was something hesitant in his posture now. The human's casual discussion of military secrets was unsettling, especially given his accurate assessment of the armor's diagnostic cycles. "You think you know something about military technology?" the trooper growled, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Humans have never faced real combat against galactic military forces. Marcus paused in his circling, tilting his head thoughtfully. "You know, you're absolutely right about that. We've never fought against galactic military forces in open warfare. But that's not really how humans prefer to handle conflicts anyway." He gestured toward the crowd of aliens watching the confrontation. "Look around you. How many different species are represented here? 40, 50? And how many of them do you think have actually studied human military history?" Several beings in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing that they knew very little about the species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. "The thing about human warfare," Marcus explained conversationally, "is that we've spent most of our history fighting opponents who had significant advantages over us. Better weapons, superior numbers, advanced technology, higher ground, more resources. So we developed some very specific strategies for dealing with superior opponents." The trooper's grip tightened on his weapon. "Primitive tactics won't help you against modern military technology." "Oh, I completely agree," Marcus said with apparent sincerity. "Charging directly at someone in powered armor would be suicide for an unarmored human. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets primitive species wiped out within the first few minutes of contact with advanced civilizations." He smiled that cold smile again. "But humans stopped thinking like that about 3,000 years ago. See, we learned that when you're facing a superior opponent, you don't attack their strengths. You identify their weaknesses, create new weaknesses if necessary, and then exploit those weaknesses in ways they never anticipated." The trooper raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Marcus's chest. "Enough philosophical discussion. You will apologize for your son's disrespectful behavior, acknowledge the authority of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, and remove yourself from this marketplace immediately." Marcus looked down at the weapon aimed at his heart, then back up at the trooper's visor. "You know what's interesting about that threat? It assumes that I'm the only variable you need to worry about." "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering directly, Marcus spoke in a slightly louder voice, ensuring his words carried throughout the marketplace. "How many beings here have children?" A rustle went through the crowd as parents instinctively moved closer to their offspring. Nearly every species represented had some form of family structure, and the universal protective instinct was clearly visible in their body language. "And how many of you," Marcus continued, "have ever seen someone in authority use physical violence against a child for the simple act of accidental contact?" The mood in the marketplace began to shift noticeably. What had started as entertainment watching a human get put in his place was being reframed as something much more disturbing. Several species present had strict cultural taboos against harming children, and the trooper's actions were beginning to be seen in a very different light. "The boy was being disrespectful," the trooper insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Discipline is necessary for maintaining order." "Discipline," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what you call kicking an 8-year-old child who was trying to apologize?" A low growl came from somewhere in the crowd. The Krillian merchants, whose crystalline exoskeletons were now resonating with harmonic frequencies that indicated extreme displeasure, were known for their protective attitude toward all younglings, regardless of species. The floating ethereal traders had changed color from their normal silver to a deep red that their species displayed, when witnessing acts they considered morally reprehensible. Even the normally peaceful Vixenites were showing signs of agitation, their fur standing on end as they processed what they had witnessed. Marcus noticed the crowd's changing mood and nodded approvingly. "You see, Trooper, you made a critical error in your tactical assessment. You assumed that the only threat in this situation was one unarmed human father, but you forgot something important about civilized beings." He gestured toward the increasingly hostile crowd surrounding them. "Most species, regardless of their technological level or military capabilities, have one thing in common. They protect children, all children, and they don't particularly appreciate watching someone in a position of power abuse that authority to harm the defenseless." The trooper's helmet swiveled nervously as he began to realize that the crowd's attention had shifted from entertainment to something much more dangerous. Beings who had been casually observing were now actively positioning themselves in ways that blocked potential escape routes. "This is still a matter between myself and this human," the trooper declared, but his voice betrayed his growing unease. "Oh, I don't think so," came a new voice from the crowd. A massive thoraxian, his 6 arms crossed over his armored chest, stepped forward. "I have 3 cubs of my own, and I did not appreciate watching you assault a child." "Nor did I," added a Zelthari merchant, his 4 eyes glowing with anger. "My species may not be warriors, but we do not tolerate the abuse of younglings." More voices joined in, creating a chorus of disapproval that grew louder and more threatening with each addition. The trooper found himself at the center of a growing circle of very unhappy aliens, many of whom were significantly larger and more physically imposing than the human who had started this confrontation. Marcus watched the situation develop with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as intended. "You wanted to teach my son a lesson about authority and respect," he said calmly. "Well, congratulations. You've just provided an excellent demonstration of why authority without wisdom is just another form of bullying." The trooper's situation had deteriorated rapidly, from a simple demonstration of authority to something approaching a riot. Beings from dozens of species were now openly expressing their anger at what they had witnessed, and their combined presence was creating a pressure that even advanced military armor couldn't ignore. "This is getting out of hand," the trooper muttered, his weapon swinging back and forth as he tried to track multiple potential threats simultaneously. "All of you need to disperse immediately, or I'll be forced to call for backup." Marcus laughed, a sound that carried no humor whatsoever. "Backup? You mean more Galactic Authority troops who might also feel the need to kick children when they bump into them accidentally?" The suggestion sent another wave of anger through the crowd. Several species present had historical experiences with oppressive military forces, and the idea of more armed troops arriving to support someone who had just assaulted a child struck them as exactly the kind of escalation that needed to be prevented. "I am a duly authorized representative of galactic law," the trooper insisted, his voice now carrying a note of desperation. "Interfering with my duties is a serious crime." "Your duties," Marcus repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "And what exactly do those duties include? Terrorizing children? Demonstrating the superiority of advanced civilizations by bullying the defenseless?" He took a step closer to the trooper, completely ignoring the weapon still pointed at his chest. "Let me tell you something about human law enforcement, trooper. On my world, any police officer who kicked a child would find himself facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and probably unemployed by the end of the week. The idea that advanced technology gives you the right to abuse your authority would be considered barbaric by most human cultures." The crowd murmured its agreement, and several beings nodded their approval of this human concept of justice. The trooper was beginning to realize that his actions had been judged and found wanting by a jury of galactic citizens, and the verdict was decidedly unfavorable. "But here's the really interesting part," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that somehow managed to be both educational and threatening. "You made another critical error in your assessment of this situation. You assumed that I was angry." The trooper's helmet tilted slightly in confusion. "You're not angry about what happened to your son?" "Oh, I'm absolutely furious," Marcus confirmed with that same cold smile. "But anger is just an emotion. What you should be worried about is that I'm also thinking clearly, planning carefully, and executing a strategy that you never saw coming." Several aliens in the crowd were now recording the confrontation, and Marcus noticed their devices with satisfaction. "You see, one thing humans learned very early in our technological development is the power of information. We discovered that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a sword or a gun or an energy cannon. Sometimes it's a story." The trooper's weapon wavered slightly as he processed this statement. "What are you talking about?" Marcus gestured toward the recording devices scattered throughout the crowd. "Right now, dozens of beings are capturing every moment of this encounter. They're recording a Galactic Authority trooper who kicked a human child for accidentally bumping into him. They're watching that same trooper threaten an unarmed father who dared to object to the assault on his son. The implications of this began to dawn on the trooper as he noticed the recording devices for the first time. In an age of instantaneous galactic communication, Footage of his actions could be transmitted across the known galaxy within hours. And here's the beautiful part about galactic information networks, Marcus continued cheerfully. Once something gets uploaded to the public databases, it never really goes away. Centuries from now, when beings study the history of human integration into galactic society, they'll be able to watch this exact moment. The trooper's posture had shifted from aggressive to defensive, and his weapon was no longer aimed directly at Marcus. The realization that his actions were being preserved for posterity was clearly having an effect on his confidence. But wait, there's more, Marcus said with the enthusiasm of someone revealing the best part of a surprise. See, humans have been dealing with corrupt authority figures for thousands of years. We've developed some very effective methods for handling situations where official power is being abused. He pointed toward a small device that one of the alien spectators was holding. That's not just recording video. It's also streaming live to several galactic news networks. Right now, beings across dozens of star systems are watching this confrontation in real time. The trooper's helmet swiveled to stare at the device in question, and his entire body language shifted to something approaching panic. That's not possible. This is just a minor incident on a remote trading station. You're right, it was a minor incident, Marcus agreed. Right up until you decided to demonstrate your authority by assaulting a child. That's when it became a story about abuse of power, the treatment of younger species in galactic society, and the question of whether advanced technology gives anyone the right to use violence against the defenseless. Several beings in the crowd were now openly discussing the implications of what they had witnessed. The ethereal traders were communicating in their native language, a complex series of color changes that Marcus couldn't understand, but which seemed to indicate extreme displeasure. The Krillian merchants were producing harmonic frequencies that suggested they were already composing formal complaints to file with higher authorities. The really fascinating thing about humans, Marcus continued conversationally, is that we're very good at turning individual incidents into larger conversations about justice and fairness. We have this annoying habit of asking uncomfortable questions like, if this is how galactic authority treats human children, how do they treat the children of other species? The trooper's weapon was now pointing at the ground, and his entire posture suggested someone who was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. I was just maintaining order. The child was being disrespectful. The child, Marcus said with deadly quiet, was being 8 years old. He saw something that fascinated him, got excited, and accidentally stepped backward into you. Then he immediately tried to apologize just like his mother taught him before she died. The mention of Tommy's deceased mother sent another wave of sympathy through the crowd, and several beings made what were clearly protective gestures toward the boy, who was still being comforted by the morphine vendor. So here's what's going to happen now, Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had just finished setting an elaborate trap and was ready to spring it. You're going to have a choice to make, Trooper, and that choice is going to define not just how this incident ends, but how the entire galaxy remembers the first time a galactic authority officer assaulted a human child. The marketplace had become completely silent except for the soft hum of recording devices and the distant sounds of station life continuing beyond the crowd. Every being present seemed to understand that they were witnessing a pivotal moment, not just for the immediate participants, but potentially for human galactic relations as a whole. The trooper stood motionless for several long seconds, his weapon pointing uselessly at the floor while his helmet's sensors undoubtedly tracked the dozens of recording devices now focused on him. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all traces of its earlier arrogance. What? What choice? Marcus smiled, but this time there was something almost predatory in the expression. You can double down on your position that assaulting children is an acceptable expression of authority. You can claim that your actions were justified, that humans need to be kept in their place, and that superior technology gives you the right to use violence against anyone who doesn't show you sufficient respect. He paused, letting the implication sink in. If you choose that path, then every being watching this recording will see a representative of galactic civilization defending the abuse of children. They'll see the galactic authority's true attitude toward younger species, toward the defenseless, toward anyone who doesn't have the power to fight back. Several aliens in the crowd made sounds that indicated extreme disapproval of this possibility. The Thoraxian who had spoken earlier was now flexing his 6 arms in a way that suggested he was preparing for violence if the trooper chose the wrong option. Or, Marcus continued, his voice softening slightly, you can acknowledge that you made a mistake. You can admit that kicking a child was wrong, regardless of whatever disrespect you perceived. You can demonstrate that even the Galactic Authority is capable of recognizing when its representatives have acted inappropriately. The trooper's helmet turned toward Tommy, who was still being comforted by the morphine vendor. The boy's torn shirt and scraped palms were visible evidence of the assault, and several beings in the crowd had positioned themselves to ensure the injuries were clearly visible to all recording devices. If I were to acknowledge that my actions were inappropriate, the trooper said slowly, what would happen then? Marcus considered the question with apparent seriousness. Well, that would depend on how sincere your acknowledgement was, wouldn't it? A grudging admission delivered under pressure wouldn't carry much weight with this crowd. But a genuine recognition of wrongdoing, combined with a meaningful apology to my son, might go a long way toward demonstrating that the Galactic Authority is capable of justice. The trooper looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing expressions ranging from anger to disappointment to outright hostility. The recording devices continued their work, preserving every moment of his indecision for galactic posterity. There is, of course, a third option, Marcus added casually, causing everyone to focus on him intently. You could try to use that weapon to silence the witnesses, destroy the recordings, and cover up what happened here today. The suggestion sent a visible shock through the crowd, and several beings instinctively moved to protect the more vulnerable members of their groups. The trooper's grip tightened on his plasma rifle, and for a moment it seemed like he might actually consider the violent solution. But that would be a very poor tactical decision, Marcus continued in the same conversational tone, because while you might be able to eliminate everyone in this marketplace, you can't eliminate the live streams that are already broadcasting to news networks across the galaxy. And you definitely can't eliminate the questions that would be asked when a Galactic Authority trooper killed dozens of civilians on a peaceful trading station. The trooper's weapon trembled slightly in his hands. You're trying to manipulate me. Absolutely, Marcus agreed without hesitation. I'm using information, social pressure, and strategic thinking to achieve my objectives. It's exactly what humans do when we can't rely on superior firepower or advanced technology. He gestured toward the crowd of aliens who continued to watch the confrontation with hostile attention. But here's the thing about manipulation. It only works when people have choices. And right now you have exactly the same choices you had 5 minutes ago. The only thing that's changed is that now you understand the consequences of each option. The trooper stood in silence for nearly a full minute, his armored form completely motionless while his internal systems undoubtedly ran through tactical assessments and probability calculations. When he finally moved, it was to slowly lower his weapon and engage the safety locks. He began, then stopped, seemingly struggling with words that his species and training had never prepared him to speak. Marcus waited patiently, making no move to pressure the trooper or interrupt his internal struggle. The crowd remained equally silent, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented in galactic relations. I acted inappropriately, the trooper said finally, his voice barely audible through the armor's speakers. The child's actions did not warrant physical correction, and my response was excessive. A murmur ran through the crowd, but it was muted, as if everyone understood that this was just the beginning of what needed to happen. The trooper's helmet turned toward Tommy, and his next words came out with obvious difficulty. I apologize for causing you harm, young one. Your behavior was not deserving of violence, and I should not have allowed my prejudices to influence my actions. Tommy looked up at his father, clearly uncertain how to respond to this unprecedented situation. Marcus nodded encouragingly, and the boy stepped forward on shaky legs. It's okay, Tommy said in his high, clear voice that carried easily through the silent marketplace. My daddy says everyone makes mistakes sometimes. The important thing is to learn from them and try to do better next time. The simple wisdom of the child's words seemed to have a profound effect on many of the aliens present. Several species made gestures that indicated approval or emotional response, and even the recording devices seemed to focus more intently on the small boy, who had just demonstrated a level of maturity that many adults would struggle to achieve. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. His expression had softened somewhat during the exchange between the trooper and his son, but there was still something calculating in his eyes that suggested the lesson wasn't over. That was a good start. he said quietly. But apologies are just words unless they're backed up by actions. The trooper's helmet tilted toward him with obvious apprehension. What do you mean? Marcus walked over to his son and knelt beside him, gently examining the scrapes on the boy's palms and the tear in his shirt. Well, for starters, my son is going to need medical attention for these injuries. Nothing serious, but those scrapes should be properly cleaned and treated. He stood and faced the trooper directly. And since you caused those injuries through an unprovoked assault, I think it would be appropriate for you to personally ensure he receives proper care. The suggestion clearly made the trooper uncomfortable, but he nodded slowly. I can escort you to the medical bay. Oh no, Marcus said with that cold smile returning. I don't think you understand. I'm not asking you to point us in the right direction. I'm suggesting that you personally take responsibility for ensuring my son receives proper treatment. That means accompanying us, waiting while he's examined, and making sure all medical expenses are covered. The implications of this request began to ripple through the crowd. For a Galactic Authority trooper to personally escort a human child to medical treatment would be an unprecedented display of accountability. Many species present had never seen a representative of Galactic Authority take personal responsibility for correcting their mistakes. Furthermore, Marcus continued, I think this incident highlights some serious gaps in Galactic Authority training protocols. When was the last time you or your fellow troopers received sensitivity training regarding interactions with civilian populations, especially children from developing species? The trooper was clearly struggling with questions he had never been asked to consider. We receive combat training, law enforcement protocols, and cultural awareness briefings. Cultural awareness briefings, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. And yet you felt comfortable referring to humans as primitive and barely above classification status. That suggests your briefings might need some updating. Several aliens in the crowd made sounds of agreement. The ethereal traders were now pulsing with colors that indicated they were composing formal communications, likely to their own governments about what they had witnessed. Here's what I propose, Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone of someone presenting a business deal. My son and I are new to this station, and we're still learning about galactic society. You clearly need some education about human culture and appropriate interaction protocols. Why don't we help each other? The trooper remained silent, but his posture suggested he was listening intently. You're going to personally escort my son to medical treatment, and while we're there, you're going to listen to him tell you about human customs, values, and expectations regarding the treatment of children. Consider it a cultural exchange program. The trooper stared at Marcus's extended hand for a long moment, his armored form perfectly still as he processed this unexpected turn of events. Around them, the crowd watched with fascination as what had begun as a confrontation transformed into something entirely different. Slowly, the trooper reached out and grasped Marcus's hand with his own gauntleted appendage. The handshake was awkward, given the size difference and the intervening armor, but the symbolism was not lost on anyone present. I accept your proposal, the trooper said formally. I will ensure your son receives proper medical attention, and I will listen to what he has to teach me about human customs. A cheer went up from several beings in the crowd, and the recording devices captured every moment of this unprecedented reconciliation. Tommy looked up at his father with wide eyes, clearly amazed at how the situation had transformed from terrifying to educational. Excellent, Marcus said, releasing the trooper's hand and turning to address his son. Tommy, you're going to have a very interesting afternoon. This trooper is going to take you to see the station's medical team, and while they're fixing up those scrapes, you can tell him all about how things work back on Earth. Tommy's natural enthusiasm began to overcome his earlier fear. Can I tell him about baseball? And how we have ice cream after dinner on Sundays? And about how Mom used to read me stories before bed? You can tell him about anything you want, Marcus assured him. Just remember to be polite and answer any questions he might have about our customs. The trooper knelt down to Tommy's level, bringing his imposing form closer to the boy's height. When he spoke, his voice had been modulated to a gentler tone that somehow made the mechanical amplification less intimidating. I would be honored to learn about your world. Young Tommy, perhaps you could start by explaining why your father remained so calm during our disagreement. Tommy considered this question with the seriousness that children brought to important discussions. Daddy says that getting angry makes you stupid, and stupid people make bad decisions. He says the best way to win is to think better than the other person, not fight harder. Several aliens in the crowd made appreciative sounds at this simple wisdom. The Zelthari merchants were nodding their foreheads in unison, clearly impressed by the child's articulation of human strategic thinking. "Your father is very wise," the trooper acknowledged. "I made the mistake of acting on emotion instead of thinking clearly about the consequences of my actions." As the unlikely pair prepared to leave for the medical bay, Marcus noticed that the crowd was beginning to disperse. But many beings lingered to continue discussing what they had witnessed. The Morphean vendor who had comforted Tommy approached him with her skin displaying warm, grateful colors. "Your species has given us much to think about today," she said in her melodious voice. "The way you handled that situation was unlike anything I have seen in my travels across the galaxy." Marcus smiled and inclined his head respectfully. "Humans have learned that sometimes the best way to fight is to change the nature of the conflict itself. Turn an enemy into a student, a confrontation into a conversation, and a moment of violence into an opportunity for growth." Other aliens approached with similar sentiments. The massive Thoraxian warrior extended one of his 6 arms in what Marcus recognized as a gesture of respect. "I came here ready to defend your young one with force if necessary. Instead, I witnessed something far more powerful than violence." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "Education," the Thoraxian replied. "You taught that trooper more in 10 minutes than 100 formal complaints to his superiors would have accomplished in a year." As Tommy and the trooper headed toward the medical bay, their conversation already beginning as the boy explained the concept of saying please and thank you, Marcus reflected on the broader implications of what had just occurred. A Krillian merchant approached, her crystalline exoskeleton chiming with harmonics that indicated curiosity. "Human Marcus, may I ask you something about your species' military philosophy?" "Of course." "Your tactical approach today was remarkably sophisticated, yet it required no advanced technology or superior firepower. You turned an opponent's advantages into vulnerabilities and created victory conditions that didn't exist at the beginning of the conflict. Is this typical of human strategic thinking?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "In some ways, yes. Humans have always been tool users, but our most important tools aren't weapons or machines. They're ideas, stories, and the ability to change how other people see a situation." He gestured toward the direction Tommy and the trooper had gone. "That trooper came here believing that might makes right, that advanced technology gives him authority over primitive species, and that violence is an acceptable way to maintain order. By the time he leaves the medical bay, he'll understand that true authority comes from wisdom, that advanced civilizations protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them, and that education is more powerful than intimidation." The Krillian's harmonics shifted to frequencies that indicated deep appreciation. "And he will carry these lessons back to his fellow troopers, potentially changing how the entire Galactic Authority approaches interactions with developing species." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "One incident, properly handled, can ripple outward to affect thousands of future interactions. That's the real power of strategic thinking. It multiplies the impact of individual actions." An ethereal trader drifted closer, its silver form now displaying subtle patterns of light that indicated profound respect. "We have transmitted recordings of today's events to our home worlds. Many of our leaders are already discussing the implications of human integration into galactic society." "What kind of implications?" Marcus asked with genuine curiosity. "Your species demonstrates capabilities that our databases did not predict. Strategic thinking that turns disadvantages into advantages, social manipulation that creates positive outcomes for all parties, and a philosophical approach to conflict resolution that could revolutionize galactic diplomacy." Marcus felt a sense of pride, not just for himself but for his entire species. Humans have been solving problems for a long time. We're just happy to share our solutions with the wider galaxy. As the crowd continued to thin out, Marcus made his way toward the medical bay to check on his son's progress. Along the way, he encountered the Vorthon engineer who had mentioned the armor specifications that had proven so crucial to his strategy. "Engineer Korthak," Marcus greeted him. "I wanted to thank you for that conversation we had about Galactic Authority equipment specifications." The Vorthon's tentacles writhed in what Marcus had learned was equivalent to a confused expression. "I remember our discussion, but I do not understand how technical information about diagnostic cycles could be relevant to a social conflict." Marcus smiled. Information is power, my friend. The more you understand about your environment, the more options you have when situations become challenging. You gave me the knowledge I needed to demonstrate to that trooper that humans are more observant and better prepared than most species assume. Fascinating, Korthak mused. So the technical details were not intended to create vulnerabilities in the armor, but to establish credibility for your subsequent psychological strategy. Precisely. Sometimes the most important battle is the one for credibility and respect. Once you have those, actual conflict becomes unnecessary. As Marcus reached the medical bay, he could hear Tommy's animated voice explaining the rules of soccer to his attentive guardian. The boy's natural enthusiasm had completely overcome his earlier fear, and he was clearly enjoying his role as cultural ambassador. Through the transparent wall of the medical facility, Marcus could see the trooper listening intently as Tommy demonstrated how humans showed friendship through simple gestures like sharing food or helping with tasks. The contrast between the massive armored figure and the small boy created a powerful image that Marcus hoped would be remembered throughout the galaxy. The lesson in fear had become something much more valuable, a lesson in understanding respect and the power of choosing education over intimidation, and perhaps most importantly, it had shown the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons, but their ability to transform enemies into allies through wisdom, patience, and strategic thinking. 3 months later, Marcus was working in the station's primary engineering bay when his communicator chimed with an incoming message. The sender's identification caused him to pause in his calibration of the atmospheric processors. It was from Galactic Authority headquarters. "Marcus Chen," he answered, wondering if this was finally the official response to the incident that had been recorded and transmitted across known space. "Mr. Chen, this is Commander Vexihai of the Galactic Authority Administrative Division. I am contacting you regarding Incident Report GA7745 Delta, which occurred approximately 93 standard days ago on Zephyr Station." Marcus set down his tools and gave the conversation his full attention. "I remember the incident, Commander. How can I help you?" "Actually, Mr. Chen, we were hoping to discuss how we might help each other. The recordings of your interaction with Trooper Caltech have been studied extensively by our training division, and we would like to propose a rather unusual arrangement." This was not what Marcus had expected. "What kind of arrangement?" "We would like to offer you a position as a civilian consultant for our Cultural Integration and Conflict Resolution Department. Your unique approach to de-escalating tensions while achieving favorable outcomes has attracted considerable attention from our leadership." Marcus was quiet for several seconds, processing this unexpected development. "Commander, I'm flattered, but I'm just a maintenance engineer. I don't have any formal training in diplomacy or conflict resolution." "Perhaps not formal training," Commander Vexihai agreed, "but you demonstrated capabilities that our most experienced officers lack. You turned a potentially violent confrontation into an educational opportunity, transformed an antagonistic trooper into an advocate for improved cultural sensitivity, and managed to do it all in a way that enhanced rather than diminished the authority's reputation." The commander paused before continuing. "Trooper Caltech has become something of a phenomenon within our ranks. He has voluntarily enrolled in advanced cultural sensitivity courses, requested assignment to community outreach programs, and has written a comprehensive report on human social dynamics that is now required reading for all authority personnel assigned to human-populated systems." Marcus couldn't help but smile at this news. "How is Tommy's former nemesis doing?" "Quite well, actually. He specifically requested permission to maintain contact with your son, and they have been corresponding regularly. Trooper Caltech has learned an impressive amount about human customs, and young Tommy has been teaching him about concepts like empathy, forgiveness, and what he calls being nice to people even when they're different." The warmth in Marcus's chest grew stronger. Tommy had been excited about his ongoing correspondence with the trooper, sharing stories about their exchanges, and proudly showing off the small gifts Caltech had sent from various systems where his duties had taken him. But the implications extend far beyond one. "Trooper's personal growth," Commander Vexihai continued. "The recordings of your interaction have been used as training materials across multiple species military and law enforcement organizations. Your techniques have been studied, analyzed, and adapted for use in dozens of different cultural contexts. Marcus sat down heavily in his work chair. Commander, I think you might be overestimating what happened that day. I was just a father trying to protect his son and teach a bully some manners. Mr. Chen, in the past 3 months, incidents of authority personnel using excessive force against civilians have dropped by 67% in systems where your training materials have been implemented. Complaints about cultural insensitivity have decreased by over 40%. And perhaps most significantly, several species that were considering withdrawing from galactic authority protection have reversed their decisions after witnessing evidence that we are capable of learning and growth. The magnitude of these statistics was staggering. Marcus had never imagined that one incident in a marketplace could have such far-reaching consequences. What exactly would this consultant position involve? He asked. You would work with our training division to develop new protocols for civilian interactions, particularly involving developing species and family units. You would also serve as a cultural advisor for situations where traditional authority approaches have proven insufficient. Commander Vexhai's tone became more personal. Mr. Chen, your species is still new to galactic society, but you have already demonstrated that humans possess unique capabilities that could benefit the entire galactic community. Strategic thinking that turns confrontation into cooperation, emotional intelligence that recognizes the humanity in all sentient beings, and practical wisdom that finds solutions where others see only problems. Marcus looked around the engineering bay where he had been content to work in relative anonymity, then thought about Tommy and the kind of galaxy he wanted his son to grow up in. Commander, I appreciate the offer, but I have one condition. Name it. Tommy comes with me. If I'm going to be teaching people about human values and family dynamics, he needs to be part of the process. He's the one who taught that trooper about forgiveness and kindness, after all. Already anticipated and approved, Commander Vexhai replied with what might have been amusement. Young Tommy has been specifically requested as a junior cultural consultant. Apparently, several species representatives found his perspectives during the recorded incident to be remarkably insightful. Marcus laughed, imagining his 8-year-old son sitting in diplomatic meetings and explaining the importance of saying please and thank you to galaxy-spanning civilizations. In that case, Commander, you have yourself a consultant. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the observation deck of the Authority training facility on Centauri Prime, watching his son demonstrate proper conflict resolution techniques to a class of cadets from 7 different species. Tommy, now 9 and considerably more confident, was explaining why it was important to listen to people even when you disagreed with them. My daddy says that everybody has reasons for what they do, Tommy told his attentive audience of future law enforcement officers. Even when those reasons seem dumb to you, they make sense to the person who has them. So if you want to solve problems instead of just winning fights, you have to understand what people are really worried about. A young Krillian cadet raised one of her crystalline appendages. But what if someone is behaving irrationally? What if their concerns are based on incorrect information? Tommy considered this question with the seriousness he brought to all his teaching duties. Then you help them get better information, but you do it in a way that doesn't make them feel stupid. Because if you make people feel stupid, they stop listening to you, and then you can't help them at all. Marcus watched with pride as his son fielded questions about human psychology, conflict resolution, and the importance of treating all beings with dignity regardless of their technological level or species origin. The boy who had been kicked by a trooper for accidentally bumping into him had become one of the galaxy's most effective teachers of empathy and understanding. Sir? A voice behind him interrupted his thoughts. Marcus turned to see Trooper Caltech, now wearing the insignia of a cultural liaison specialist, approaching with obvious respect. Caltech, Marcus greeted his former opponent warmly.
How are the new sensitivity training protocols working out?
Better than anyone anticipated, the former trooper replied. Incident reports are down across all categories. Civilian satisfaction with authority interactions has improved dramatically, and we've actually had several species request increased authority presence in their systems. Caltech paused, watching Tommy through the observation window. Mr. Chen, I wanted to thank you again for the lesson you taught me that day, not just about human customs or proper behavior, but about the difference between authority and leadership. What's the difference? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Authority is what you have when people fear the consequences of disobeying you, Caltech replied. Leadership is what you have when people choose to follow you because they trust your judgment and respect your values. Marcus nodded approvingly. And which one creates a better galaxy? Leadership without question. Fear might maintain order in the short term, but respect and understanding create lasting peace. As they watched, Tommy finished his demonstration and began taking questions from the cadets. One young ethereal asked about human concepts of justice, and Tommy launched into an explanation of fairness that included examples from playground disputes and family rules. You know, Marcus said thoughtfully, when that incident happened in the marketplace, I was just trying to protect my son and maybe teach one bully a lesson about consequences. I never imagined it would turn into this. Perhaps that's why it worked so well, Caltech suggested. You weren't trying to change the galaxy. You were just trying to do the right thing for your family. But sometimes the right thing, done for the right reasons, has effects that ripple far beyond what anyone expected. Marcus smiled as he watched his son conclude his lesson by reminding the cadets that the most important rule in any interaction was to remember that everyone, regardless of species or appearance, was somebody's child.